Hello to everybody. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where in the world you are today and you're joining us from. This is the third session of the Child and Adolescent to Parent Violence and Abuse that we're bringing you today from NOFASD Australia. Today in our session we are going to be joined by Associate Professor Anita Gibbs from the University of Otago, and also Cheryl Dedman, who will introduce herself also from NOFASD Australia. I would like to acknowledge that NOFASD Australia pays respect to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We're very grateful to be able to speak on the land we speak from today. Now I'd love to introduce you to everyone that's joining us today. So my name is Sophie Harrington. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for NOFASD Australia. We have Kurt Lewis, who's here with us today.
Howdy everyone, I'm Kurt Lewis. I'm project facilitator and I'll be the tech guy for today. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Kurt. And we have, of course, Associate Professor Anita Gibbs, who's leading our session today.
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to the first two webinars, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you further about some of the material and questions that you've already shared with us as a consequence of those.
Thanks, Anita. And we also have Cheryl Dedman with us today.
Hi everyone, my name's Cheryl Dedman. I'm Chair of the Board of NOFASD Australia and the parent of a teenager who is living with FASD. Through both my role with NOFASD and the relationships that I have with other carers, I've had the privilege of families sharing their stories with me. Whilst maintaining confidentiality, I'll be drawing on these stories and my own personal knowledge during our discussions today.
Thanks, Cheryl. So today's session is slightly different to the last two. As you can tell, we're live and we have both Cheryl and Anita with us today. Today's session will again be recorded as the third part of our third series. And today we have three options and how you may be able to integrate with the session. So many of you have already sent us through a number of questions which Anita will refer to throughout the webinar, so thank you for these. The second option is that you can click on the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. When you do so, you can choose to ask a question anonymously and you will be replied to anonymously. The third option is that you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and I will respond to you. You can either respond to the questions, or ask your questions yourself by using your video and or your microphone, but we do need to make you aware that even if you choose not to share your video, the name you've registered with will become visible on the display, and the session today is recorded. Okay, thank you everybody. So I would just like to remind you that, we are having pretty courageous conversations today. These are real questions that have come through from parents and carers. So these are very emotive and emotional questions potentially. I just want to remind you, this is a safe environment, but it is being shared as a recording. Please take care of yourselves and follow up with the NOFASD helpline on 1800 860 613 if you do need any further support following today's session. Thank you. Okay, Anita and Cheryl, over to you.
Okay, we're just going to take over screen sharing as we try to ensure that we don't get confused with the slides. Not that we particularly need my screen to share at this moment, so I'll put stop share. But I'll just take you through how this live webinar conversation or webinar may go. It's very much an opportunity for you to participate with us. So we plan to review the few questions that have come in from a few people first, drawing on the material that we've covered in the last two sessions, and then we'll respond to further questions from you. Don't worry if you don't have any at this stage, but if you've got them, as Sophie said, there are ways to share them with us. We can look a little bit more detail in some of the material that was covered in session 2, because I know I gave you a lot of ideas and links. We've got the case study of Gwen and Anthony, and we can use that case study to explore and relate back to some of those materials that I shared with you, particularly in webinar 2. And We can also talk about what we think of some of the programs, or even what you think of some of the programs that you've heard about, whether or not they'd be useful, particularly for those with FASD. I asked you a few questions last time. Again, what you thought about child parent violence and abuse, and what was your experiences, or what sort of help you had received from agencies, and what kind of helps and supports would you like to have, or do you feel you need? So there are so many things that we can really talk about. So I'm sure we'll be have some really thoughtful conversation, and we can talk about anything to do with FASD too. We're always, you know, we're here. So if we start, I think, and that's okay with you, Cheryl? Sounds like a good plan. Yep. Okay, so if we start with a couple of sort of anonymous questions that have already come in. We had one where the grandparents of a 12-year-old grandson whom we've had care of since he was around 2, so he's 12 now. In the last 6 months, he's become disrespectful, verbally and physically violent towards, unfortunately, the grandparents, grandmother and grandfather, and doctors, health professionals are not of much help, and the grandparents are describing, you know, great distress. We are at the end of our rope, which is a very real thing, and rest assured, many of us have absolutely been there, and still sometimes go there. So, you know, these kind of this kind of questions, you know, big question, because obviously I don't really know what's going on fully in the lives of this lovely family, but you know, just my initial thoughts would be, you know, are there any major changes going on for this lovely lad? You know, are we looking at you know, puberty changes, changes to do with friends, changes to do with schooling, other types of changes that are going on for him? What's new for him? You know, when you say obviously that you're at the end of the rope, that tells me obviously you need help. I mean, how can help be forthcoming? Who can you turn to? Are there any other families, far now relatives? Are there friends? Are there neighbours? Are there services? Obviously you've tried by the sounds of it in terms of doctors, but maybe there's allied health professions or support organisations that you haven't yet found in your area. Obviously I don't know what your area is. Obviously we've given you lots of ideas in the last 2 sessions. Hopefully you've been able to just overview them. If you have access again to that material, is there a way of using that material to go like, oh, what is going on behind this behaviour? Often you're in the stress of that daily distress as a family, and so it's actually quite hard to go like, oh, I need to unpack this, you know, as if you've got the time to unpack this and actually reach out and analyse what's going on. But what is he really saying? Is there any way of finding out? Is it a case of there's other things that are making a big difference that is then coming out in the behaviour and reactions to you? Is it a case of can't rather than won't, you know, that he's not being deliberately awkward, difficult, oppositional? It's that he can't, because we understand obviously fetal alpha spectrum disorder is a brain-based disability, you know, that you know, impacts people in a range of ways where actually it's really hard for them to do some things, and our expectations are kind of a bit too high sometimes. And where is it that we have to maybe lower those expectations? What is his behavior trying to communicate in some ways? You know, is there a hidden need? And I know that with sometimes with my own situation, that sometimes I didn't get the hidden need because I was just looking too much at the here and now, and I didn't unpack that hidden need till maybe much later, you know, when I was kind of on respite. Oh, so that's probably what was going on. Maybe I should try and find out a bit more. Is he feeling safe? And it's like a lot of the time I know that for my own family situation where my son's feeling safe, and I didn't always read that they weren't feeling safe. So therefore, perhaps they were struggling because of not feeling safe, and they were feeling distressed about what was going on around them. So even if we think they're feeling safe, because we've tried to create a beautiful, safe environment around them, a loving environment, a predictable environment, actually maybe, you know, they're not feeling safe right now. So that would be another way that I'd be trying to unpack that situation. So, and you have to stay safe, obviously. So if you're going to stay safe, what needs to change? The first time I was told to make a safety plan, it was like, safety plan? Why would I make a safety plan? I don't need to be a safety plan. You know, I can handle myself. But actually, the more I thought about it, the more I realized actually that was a good idea. And then try to make a safety plan in a collaborative way with members in your family, because that might then bring up the issues of your children not feeling safe in certain circumstances. There's the issue is if you choose to stand your ground, where do you draw the line? What can you tolerate and what can you not tolerate? So are there some things that are beyond what you can tolerate? And that's where you really need A plan, B, to involve people, C, to sort of get people alongside you to scaffold the protection that you might need, or the supports that you need, or a way of finding ways to talk about what's going on. And are there any consequences that you can stick to depending on what your expectations are? I know I've had to have periods in my life where I've got high expectations, and then I've had to lower them, and then I've built them up again, depending on where we've been at in our sort of peacefulness and restfulness and well-being as a family. So what do you need to do to both accommodate, if you like, because we talk about that a lot in relation to neurodisability, what's going on for him once you kind of know, but at the same time, what is realistic in terms of the expectation? So that would be my initial thoughts on that question. That was one of the bigger questions we had. In fact, maybe I'll just give Cheryl a chance to interject, because she may have some comments on that question too.
Look, thanks, Anita. I agree totally with everything that you've said. I'm just going to extend just a little bit on what Anita has spoken about, because, look, sadly, we hear this story really often, so you're not alone. It's difficult because as grandparents, this is not the sort of relationship that you would be expecting to have with a grandchild. You know, when you're a grandparent, you're supposed to be able to have more of a relaxed relationship. So, you know, there's a grief there for you, first of all, apart from the grief that you're going through with what is happening in your situation. So what I see as being a positive, though, is that we have the power of technology on our side. As we've discovered with COVID-19, technology is helping us to connect in ways that we never thought we could, and with people that we never thought that we could. So I would use that, firstly, to find informed professionals and then work with them for the assessments needed and then the support. So assessments really give you a sense of power. I mean, we don't know what sort of assessments you've already got now. They may be already be able to be used with any assessments that you've got with a FASD informed professional, that they can then work towards putting together a plan of what's going to be best for you. Because as Anita spoke just before about when she was in a respite period, she was able to click and say, oh, maybe that would work. Think about why that might be. That's because you are in a calmer state, not as calm as what you'd like to be, because, you know, you're in a respite situation because of circumstances, but in getting some support for yourselves so that you can allow that to happen and you will be able to work through things in a lot clearer way is really, really important. The environment is what I would say is really important. And this is not a criticism when we talk about, you know, how clean your house is or anything like that. But is it an environment that's going to help your grandson to be able to feel relaxed and calm? Is it overstimulating? Is there equipment that you can use to help to calm and regulate your grandson? I believe that regulation is the key to everything. It's not going to fix every problem, but it's going to help you to work towards those answers that you are so desperately seeking. Also, I do have access to a document that helps you to assess every room in your house from an occupational therapy point of view. And I'm not going to sort of fob you off by saying I'd like you to just call the NOFASD helpline, but because it is really complex, it's something that would take a while to sort of talk through. So I would recommend anyone calling the NOFASD helpline, and we can work through that most definitely. So yeah, I think just with that wonderful information from Anita and thinking about what you can do in your circumstance to bring about regulation, not only for your grandson, but for you, so that you can work together to a much more positive future. I think that's really important. Thanks, Anita.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Excellent. I knew we were going to give some reasonable advice today. Excellent. So a couple of the other questions which we'll talk about as we go on. One is I'd love to know which of these practitioners or programs in the other approaches, presumably from webinar 2, are FASD formed in, please. Well, in short, none, but in short also some of those programs will have elements where they're looking at a bit of anxiety, other things going on for children, sometimes autism, but essentially we don't have specific programs that are FASD informed in relation to dealing with this issue, which is kind of why we're doing these seminars. But we'll look at the programs a bit later, because the next question is not too dissimilar. Has the Step Up program been found effective by many families with living with FASD? Again, I mean, I haven't found a specific piece of work on the Step Up program for those with FASD, but the reality is there are elements of the Step Up program which may help some families and in some situations. So we kind of in many ways got to take what we think will work for us or what we think is relevant for us and actually test it out sometimes, rather than go, like, okay, this program is definitely going to make all the difference. I found that my knowledge has been growing as I've been looking at this issue, and I've been able to apply different things from some of the different programs I've read about to my own situation at different times. So at the moment, I've not necessarily saying there's one size that fits all. In fact, that never is the case, is it, with FASD? But it may be that we can grow something together as a community in Australia and New Zealand. So watch this space. So has any research been published? There's lots of research, but again, very limited in relation to these programs and FASD. Can you hold a family conversation with a 4 or 6-year-old who might be perpetrating violence? I'd probably avoid the words perpetrating violence for that age group, for starters, simply because you're getting into a little bit of a kind of like potential for saying, oh, they're deliberately doing it, they're carrying it on, they have no control, and they're really, really young. And if they've got a diagnosis of any neurodisability, but particularly FASD, it's basically like dealing with a 2-year-old if we're thinking much younger age than their actually chronological age. So we're not really going to have sort of sophisticated conversations with children that young. However, so, you know, think developmental age, very, very important in that respect. Think much younger than actual age usually. There may be simple terms. You know, it's about trying to model a lot of the time at that age. It's also about finding ways to praise children, isn't it? Rather than saying you're naughty, you shouldn't do that, which is sometimes, unfortunately, our first reaction. We actually need to be going like, hang on a minute. What is going on here for the child? How come they might be getting distressed? A lot of children obviously spit, hit, kick at age 4 and 6. It's not outside the realms of even, you know, ordinary, so to speak. But sometimes our children do it an awful lot more than other children, and we end up with a lot of disapproval from parents. I've had that experience myself. But we're trying to avoid that sort of negativity setting in at an early age. So we're trying to encourage the child when they are polite. We're trying to give them lots of praise. You know, when they do share their sweeties, when they do actually give their pencil crayon to share, we're trying to sometimes take the child out of a situation when they're utterly exhausted, they're sensorily overloaded, they're having a major meltdown and things are flying high. We're trying to sometimes let them have space. And often I found with my own little toddlers when they were, you know, they could roll around the floor and have the meltdown for several hours, but eventually they'd have their sleep, which is what they really needed, but they were fighting it. And then they would rest, recover, and then After that, we would try and find a way of doing something nice. We might have to clear up a wee bit of a mess together as a fun activity, but afterward we'd be looking for ways to maybe try and sort of get a sense of did they understand what was going on. But it's a big ask to I would say, to do anything too in-depth in that level of conversation with a 4 or 6-year-old. Cheryl, did you have any thoughts on those responses that I've just given to that wee group of questions?
Yeah, thanks, Anita. Look, yeah, I agree. Most likely not. Could you have a conversation? Honestly, it is quite distressing when this is happening in your household. These things are happening to you, quite often feel quite shocked. You're also living in a world where you have expectations placed upon you of what your child at that age should be doing. So you've gone into a feeling often of, wow, this is not right. And what are people going to think of me? And it's hard to actually look at it for what it actually is and to say, as Anita said, where are they developmentally? If you can get that into your mind as something that comes to your mind first, and it's just practice to think about where are they developmentally in whatever the behaviour is, that is going to help enormously. It's going to take a lot of pressure off you, take away a lot of expectations that you place upon yourself, which is normal. It's not, we're not saying, you know, you shouldn't be doing that, because it is normal. We want to be our child to fit into society. So that's a normal reaction. What I would recommend is working on regulation once again. I really think that's the key, and trauma therapy. So we're not saying that the child has been through trauma with yourselves. What we're saying is that trauma comes in very different ways. Even being exposed to alcohol in utero is a trauma. So something such as play therapy, I would highly recommend. Some animal therapies, it's a lot of looking into things about what you might think would work for your child. So it's going to be different for every child. I would recommend looking into things very carefully first, because you don't want to do something that's going to cause more harm than good. What I would like to say now is that personally, I don't have any organisation or professional work with our son unless they have had FASD training. That is something that I have found to be very, very crucial. It's not going to be a perfect situation always, even in those circumstances, but it's going to give you much, much better outcomes. That's my advice, and we've actually had that included in my son's NDIS plan, and that has been very crucial. And I have something that I think I work on very much, is that the little things can make a big difference. And that's a little thing that I think has made a big difference. So yeah, once again, I think Anita's spot on, and I would strongly recommend working on regulation and some trauma therapy.
Thank you, Cheryl. And yes, that's a lovely touch to actually get that written into any plans, whether they're the NDIS plans or whether they're education plans or whether they're some kind of supported or child protection or welfare plans, to actually make a point and sort of draw a line in the sand and really ask for professionals and support workers to be FASD informed. I think that's fantastic and great piece of advice. Thank you for that. The final short question, which I know Sophie already responded to, but again, it's one we are having both New Zealand and Australia. Is FASD recognised as a disability in Oz? Well, that's we could talk for hours about that, and the answer is both yes and no, of course. That for some people it is, and for others it's nigh on impossible to actually make any headway, both financially as well as morally and practically, and you know, in true terms. So that's why NOFASD exists, basically, to ensure that we do recognise FASD as a disability, and we can obviously chat about that a bit more. I've got one more question that came in today. It's sort of it's kind of in parts, but from an anonymous listener, and basically talking about, yes, unfortunately experiencing daily verbal and or physical abuse from a 10-year-old adopted lad, and the lad's been suspended, and they have a psychologist involved, but you know, things are going really pear-shaped. The boy's been diagnosed with a few things, ADHD, clinical anxiety, and autism, and is on medications. But the paediatrician is unsure about diagnosing FASD, as it's a dead-end path. I mean, that's a bit of a phrase, isn't it? We'll have to go and spend some time with that paediatrician, I think. So really the questions, how do sort of the idea that children, come and demand things, and so the question is, how does one, best manage a situation when a child is asking, probably demanding for something, and knows that he can't have at that time, although it must be now, just to pick a fight and have an excuse for a red rage to kick off. It feels like a catch-22. Well, I guess there's many ways to again view that. Are there ways in which the young person can be rewards for waiting, if it's something that is usually legitimate, it's just that the timing's all off? Is there a way of introducing the kind of later, but you'll get more of what you want if it's, say, watching a particular TV program? If you hang on now, you'll get an extra 15 minutes later. I mean, my strategy a lot of the time was to try and distract before it ended up spiraling and escalating into thou shalt give me or else you're in for trouble, mum. Is there a way of trying to look at the pattern? Are you giving in all the time just to keep the peace? And what are the implications for that? Because if you feel that something you're giving in and it's leading to more and more, you're ending up being more and more abused or even physically harmed, how is there a way to interrupt that? But you need to kind of see the pattern to begin with. And sometimes, again, that's really quite hard. How do we sit down, maybe write a diary or take an account of what we think's going on for the day, even though, of course, we're pretty tired usually at the end of the day. But is there a way of just reflecting, just thinking, okay, is there a way I could do that differently, rather than it going in that same mode interchange time and time again, where nobody seems to be able to free themselves from this glitchy cycle that ends up causing harm, distress to all the family members. But also you need to find ways to obviously acknowledge and hear what's going on for him at that time, because it's presenting as a need. I must have, or the whole world will absolutely fall apart, even though you know it won't. But for them, obviously, it's feeling like it will fall apart because they're trying to often exercise some control over the situation. And it's hard to know. We know what panic is like, but maybe they're in sheer panic, and we don't actually, we perhaps cannot connect to that because we're thinking sheer panic over not being able to use, a device for an hour. How is that possible to panic as if it's the end of the world? But actually, of course, it is. So the other question is, again, where are your helps? I mean, we're all in different circumstances, aren't we? And I mean, I've been blessed enough to have a wonderful partner where we've utterly tag teamed over the years, so that I've been going like, okay, this is too hard basket. It's time for you to come in, take over. You have a few rounds in a reasonable way, but just kind of like stem and calm and, as Cheryl says, regulate. And then I'll come back in, maybe in just 15 minutes, and I'll be refreshed and calm and see if we can, again, de-escalate the situation. You can't do that. You've got to regulate first. You've got to connect. You can't really do any reasoning till you've calmed the situation. And sometimes that means actually being apart from the situation. Sometimes it does get to a point where it's so distressing, it's time to walk out yourself. I mean, I've been advised to walk out of my home from time to time when I've probably been unsafe, and I've had to take that advice. Yeah, there's lots of ways. There might be ways in which you've got to think about what are your non-negotiables. That can change over the years, obviously, but what are the non-negotiables as perhaps the children get older? Things that you don't feel you can budge on, but what are your consequences if you don't feel you can budge? How will you communicate those to your children? What will you communicate in terms of the consequences, or the loss of things for short periods of time? How did the children understand that process? Because you try to avoid too much, too many rules, too many regulations in the sense of complexity and too many consequences, because it becomes overwhelming for them. But there's still some areas where you're going like, I'm sorry, I'm really not prepared to take physical abuse or whatever kind of parameters you're prepared to set the the ball or mark or whatever it is. There's a lot going on there. So that's the first part, and then the second part you talked about listening to stories from other teens with those with FASD for parents in that situation, almost looking back to when they were younger and what sort of advice would they have? And you asked, how would we do it differently? Perhaps, I look back, okay, mine are a bit older now, and okay, what could have happened differently at age 10 for them, perhaps? Well, I think the prevention, I think you mentioned occupational therapy and a speech language therapist, and I always say yes. If anybody's offering, I mean, I know that Cheryl was saying obviously check out their FASD informed, but it's like when you've got nothing, it's like, yeah, we'll try it and then I go, maybe not such a bad that was a bad idea. But for some people, they can be trained as you go along. So I've found winners and losers in a number of the professionals and supports that I've had for my family. I love, those supports where you've got either buddies who can, yes, do horse riding, or we had one doing diving, which was fantastic for self-regulation between the ages of about 10 and 12. Pear-shaped after that, but hey, for 4 years, I got some seriously good emotional regulation going on for my youngest. So that was fantastic. So is there a self-regulation regulation activity that could be facilitated by an occupational therapist that may help your child? But obviously, who knows, again, what's in your area. I think, yes, the focused earlier is about stemming the tide, because sometimes for people, their worst 2 years is, 10 to 12. Others, it can be 14 to 17. Others, it can be what's going on as an adult. Again, you have to find what works for different ages. But I think, obviously, the more that being prevented, the psychiatrist obviously could do with some FASD training, but it may be that you're going to have to be that person, and you've got to believe in yourself, I think, with your knowledge, so you can glean more knowledge, and you can then be giving handouts. I mean, many of us NOFASD would have gone to teachers and given them handouts and told them to watch videos and done a whole range of things to educate the professionals connecting with the family. So believe in yourself, believe in your own lived expertise, I think, because you are the person who knows your child the most. You are the most attuned. That's sort of a long answer to that particular scenario, but there's a lot in there. Cheryl, do you want to add?
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, look, sadly, this is a familiar story again, but I just want to let you know that you're not on your own. But I bet it feels like it, because many parents do. What Anita was saying about the best way to manage a situation, when they want something, and, as Anita said, it has to happen. It's the end of the world. It's just got to happen. Appropriate diversion is what I would recommend. So not a reward, but something that is meaningful. And it may be having some things in your mind or even written down so that you can go to that list and just be able to choose one, remembering that the same thing's just not going to work all the time. So having some different options there would be really good. And then this would give you some time and space so that both you and the child can try and just reach a point to start some regulation. So that's not actually regulation, that's just trying to bring that whole body down to start to do some regulation. So I would actually look at some exercise for regulation. You have to think about safety. Where's it safe to exercise if you go out somewhere and maybe that the child's going to abscond? So that may not be a safe sort of exercise. If you are able to have some things at home, outside, preferably for a start, to do some regulation would be really good. But I've seen some great things that you can install inside that are still safe. So that's worth looking at as well. Then I would strongly recommend a calming exercise at the end. because we think about that sort of exercise is going to also raise the whole body level, that whole intensity in our child, and the heart's going to be pumping, all that sort of thing. So to be able to get to a point where you can start to work through some issues, you need to bring that whole body back down again. So some deep breathing, rocking on a swing. For some, that might overstimulate, so you've got to know your child once again. A hammock is a great idea. Even just lying down on the ground outside and looking at the clouds, breathing, talking about the clouds, that is a calming activity. Then you would be able to hopefully be able to then talk about the situation. So that Eileen Devine talks about a circling back situation. So you come back to where the whole situation began. You circle back once you've had a calming situation, you've done some regulation, and it's the right time. So this may not work the first time. It may not work every time, but stick with it because it is the way to moving forward. But once again, you need support with that. Just reach out to NOFASD's helpline. That's what we're there for. Most importantly, I believe, is look for some support for yourself so that you can be stronger mentally to work with this. Now, me saying to you, go and get a massage every week, that's not going to work. So it's about finding some way for you that you can do some sort of escapism in your own home, because realistically, that's what it's going to be for now. And you can be able to just bring yourself down, whether it's being able to put some headphones on in your room and listening to some calming music or some meditation. It's going to depend what works for you. So I would really strongly recommend that. So the other thing, talking about stories of teens with FASD, working on the environment, I would recommend as being a huge thing. And the document that I mentioned earlier, I think is really worthwhile going through every room in your house so that you can work towards the future. So a lot of the idea is taking away that anxiety of things that they may want or want to do. So if you take away that anxiety, and it's not going to happen just straight away, it's going to be gradual, then you're going to get more chance for regulation and more chance to be able to work through the real nitty-gritty issues. I would think about everyone that you've got involved in your child's life. Everyone needs to be on board with what you're doing. Your family, your professionals, and school. And if not, this is a really hard one, I'd either have no contact or reduce contact. I mean, obviously family's family, and if that family is particularly important, it's really important to retain that contact, but it's about making it achievable. So, okay, we might go and see grandma when we don't have COVID restrictions. We might go and see grandma for 15 minutes. Well, a good 15 minutes is better than a problematic hour. Because this is actually about survival, and survival is about keeping yourself healthy mentally and physically, and also for your child, and that's the way forward there. And what is the best help that you can get right now? I would say, once again, regulation and trauma therapy. Really important. And the 10 years, it's that step just before adulthood where they're not actually an adult, even when they turn 18. So I believe that it's really important to work on those during the teen years. The psych and the psychiatrist, it is a hard one because it's quite often those sorts of professionals, it is hard to get them on board with doing some FASD training. I would shop around, and because we have technology, there is that facility to be able to do things via technology. And sometimes, it can also give a psychiatrist or specialist a view into what life is really like for you at home. Yeah, things are going to be going on, but that's how things are, and they get a more realistic picture of what things are like. And a speech therapist or occupational therapist, yes, if they're FASD trained, that's, my big advice for that, I know it's a hard one. I've been there many times, but I've also learned I'd much rather not do something if I can see it's going to be problematic, because it's only going to add to your problems. So, but I do recommend that you ring the NOFASD helpline so that we can really unpack that a whole lot more, because it is really complex. Yeah, thanks, Anita.
Great. Oh, there's some great strategies coming through there, Cheryl. I had one follow-up question, really asking if my son did scuba diving. He actually did diving off a board, so that was in a pool. But the other question was, did you have any specific safety measures in place around impulsivity and understanding the dangers of diving? Yes. Well, I mean, he didn't. He wasn't allowed to dive off the top board, and I never thought he would, but he actually did surprise me. He took a lot more coaching than the other children, but he had a group of the chief coach herself had adopted 2 boys, so she immediately could connect with his impulsivity. And yes, he was asked to wait a bit longer if he did things like jump into the pool too early in a way that was unsafe. So he was taught very carefully, and the skills were scaffolded, each safety level upon each safety level. So I mean, he did things that I would never have imagined. I mean, he jumped off that 10-meter high board, and it's like there is no way. The first time he did a little baby board, he probably took about 2 hours, and the lifeguards were absolutely fabulous, and they kept letting him go back, have another turn, and it seemed like the whole pool was willing this wee 9-year-old when he first started to get off that first jump. And the first time there was a 3-meter one, I had to go up with him. And that was so scary for me, but I stood alongside him, and I just jumped off. But I mean, it beggars imagination to imagine how tricky that was for me. But we did it together, and he just kept doing it thereafter for a period of time until eventually the relationships actually just kind of went pear-shaped in his early teens. But maybe that was the time for him to move on. But I would say that was a fantastic piece of well managed, because we did it cooperatively. I went straight in there first day saying, hey, we got FASD here, you're going to be looking at some risky stuff, and the dive coach said, nope, we can do this. We can do this if you're here, or if you've got supports, or I can trust. I know when he's ready to do certain things, and he really amazed me with that process. So it's about finding the right thing for your children, isn't it? Depending on whatever it is that's going on for them, and your opportunities. So we've got we've got some time left, obviously, and we've got I was just going to say there's another question coming in. I'll just double check that. Yep, okay. Just saying thanks for that response. I mean, we won't, I'm just going to do slide share, because we probably don't need to go over some of these things, but as Cheryl said, and she had it right, nail on the head throughout, regulation is the key. And that is obviously to do with different parts of the brain. And I've mentioned this last time, and Cheryl's given us some fantastic responses in terms of trying to exercise, of course, absolutely, is so important, not just for the male children, it's also important for the female children. They've got excess energy a lot of the time, but it can be dancing, it can be singing, it can be repetitive meditative breathing. And I love that, the clouds, looking at the clouds. One of my sons, that was one of his favorite ways of calming down, to stare up into the clouds and just relax. How fantastic is that? But you're trying to regulate and just stem the heightened stress and the heightened hyperactivity and whatever it is, and the tendency to have that volcanic explosions. But you're doing that before you can relate, but relating, of course, is about connecting. It is always about sharing your love. And sometimes we, and Sharon and I would definitely tell you this, that sometimes we are not feeling very loving towards our children, and we're going like, I actually don't want to spend time with you, but you're sort of closing your lips and going like, I mustn't say I don't actually want to be with you right now. And I must actually be looking at ways to connect. And of course, a number of the programs that we've mentioned in the last webinar, you know, the non-violent resistance, the Step Up program, all of those programs are actually saying increase your parental presence. And it's going, but you're going like, but yes, right, spend more time with them. But also for the, especially in the teens, you know, in theory, they're trying to kind of run away from you, and it looks like they don't want to spend time with you either, but actually they're also crying out for you to connect with them, to stay attuned to them, to be always trying to, I think half the time they think we are reading their minds, and okay, maybe we do have some good attunedness to them, but of course we're not entirely reading their minds, but it's like they insist that you must know what's going on for them. So you've actually obviously are trying to find ways where you can connect, have things that you have some shared interests, and even obviously interests that you wouldn't naturally follow perhaps the same thing. You still obviously are reaching out to find a way to connect and empathize, and you know what's going on for you if they're off to school and there's new relationships developing and so on. But it's only through those processes that you can then do any of that, what we would call reasoning. And of course there are limits to the reasoning, we understand that, but that's because we're trying to be connected to their age, at their developmental age. But it doesn't mean we can't reason with the child. I keep seeing my own children grow. I mean, it's taking my boys sometimes a few years longer than most boys their own age to be able to identify what anxiety means, to identify what feeling angry means, to identify what feeling sad means for them, and for it to be appropriate for them to actually put, if you like, examples of that in place. So therefore, you can't say that just because they have, a brain injury, that they don't have reasoning capacity. Clearly, they do have, but it's about how do you reason in a way that is connected, that they're in a calm space, that helps them express who they are, have a voice, and contribute. So we might look at this case study. We thought we were going to do that, but I'll ask if Cheryl wants to say anything further at this stage, because we've both had a wee think as well, haven't we, about this situation?
Yes, sorry. So yeah, okay, so we just want to unpack the Gwen and Anthony situation. Is that right, Anita?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to, okay. So firstly, if I could, I'll just go through what I'm sort of thinking would be for in Australia, something that I would suggest, given my own experience and also the parents that I've spoken to. Firstly, I think a referral needs to be made for support for Gwen and Anthony, and this can come from a GP, school, psychologist, or someone who is involved with the family. And of course, it has to be done in a really sensitive way so that Gwen and Anthony don't feel that they're being judged or made to feel that they're not capable. Because this would only compound the situation, how they're feeling. So who the referral is made to would depend upon their location. So we've got a pretty big country, and as such, we've got different services and things that are available in all areas of Australia, and they're not going to be replicated because of how diverse our country is. So a family support service would be the obvious choice, because they'd most likely have a staff member who could assist with an NDIS application if the NDIS is not already in place, or if an NDIS plan is already in place, then there could be support and management around this. There may be a review that would need to happen. So having a family support service would be really, really, really beneficial. It would be that there, in each area of Australia, there would be an organisation that would be able to direct you to wherever you would need to be able to go. A professional would be able to help you with this. Supports for Gwen and Anthony, such as household assistance, I think would be really important so that they can focus on the children and be less burdened by the day-to-day things that need to be done. And then appropriate therapies for both Stephen and Angeline. Community engagement for them both, sometimes at the same time, but other times separately, so that Gwen and Anthony can have one-on-one time with the children individually. and support for exercise. Ideally, this would be something that they could do as a family, but it would need to begin with a support worker, and because I believe it would need to be worked up to be able to do as a family successfully, because we want to set them up for success. And then a huge part of Stephen's regulation would be to help him learn to manage his aggressions. That is such a big thing. And, we're not going to say that that's easy, not at all, but it is really important for him as he gets older. Play therapy, I believe, would be ideal for both, but it would need to be done separately for them. This could help Stephen work through his aggressive behaviours and Angeline with her sensory processing issues. Occupational therapy would be beneficial for both children. And I'm thinking there particularly for Angeline, working with an OT who is specifically trained in sensory processing disorders. And FASD-specific training for anyone working with either of the children. FASD information sessions for Gwen and Anthony would really help them to understand that this is not their fault and empower them, so that by having the information, it really helps them to be able to pass that on to professionals and to other people around them. And when there is community engagement organised for the children at the same time, it would be a perfect opportunity for Gwen and Anthony to gradually learn to spend time together again and enjoy each other's company. And an NDIS plan, if it doesn't happen immediately, which it won't, I'd suggest contacting the NOFASD helpline and chat about the type of supports that they may be able to access now. And the main thing is that we want this family to be able to come together and enjoy each other's company. And it's really important to get things in place to support them individually, but together as a family. And however that can be done will depend upon the area of Australia, but there are people that can help to direct them, and also there's also the NOFASD helpline. So yeah, back to you, Anita.
Okay. So we had one little question pop up, or two in fact, Cheryl. When you say support for the house, so do you mean get a cleaner or a gardener, that type of thing? But I think you mean both that, because all kinds of support can make a difference. Sometimes just people coming in and sort of hovering and just hanging out or doing something fun in the house, or maybe taking one of the else. But sometimes, yeah, practical things where somebody is actually, doing a bit of cleaning and gardening, so that you can then spend the quality time that you want to spend with your child. So that's one question. And
yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, Anita. Yeah, absolutely. Because we want quality time with the child, and not to be saying, look, I've just got to finish this and then I'll come. But it's not practical for someone who lives with FASD. Yeah.
Yeah, and support for exercise. Yes, I mean sometimes I went sort of diving, as you know. I mean, I was there, but to take them toing and froing to those, we had somebody going taking our child to Riding for Disabled for a wee while, and that was really successful. So yeah, buddies, advocates, but again, they've got to be people who get what you're trying to do. I think it's about being part of a team, isn't it? So the team around a child has to be on the same page, because sometimes we let our children go along with some lovely young student, not to say that students aren't lovely, because I teach lots of them, but they have an awful lot of fun time, but they're almost so hyped up, they come back and then the whole house implodes when they arrive back, and you go, no, that didn't actually work, because they're not calm. And part of the plan was to have exercise, but also to be regulated, and the regulating bit didn't happen.
Yeah, so they almost need to be an extension of your family, so that they're going out and doing some things, but then come back and talk about what they did, because because your child will often want you to know what they've done, so that they feel that you have been a part of it. So that's a really important thing to do too. Yeah.
Now, this is a tricky one. When it comes to addressing their anger, and they have refused for years to utilize any type of strategy to calm themselves, what do you do? Well, I mean, it's interesting. refuse and any type of strategy. I mean, it may be not that there's no one to blame in this situation. I've certainly had periods of time when that appeared to be the case, and then I'm having to look at myself. Okay, so if I'm actually, my child cannot change, this could be a wheelchair moment in a sense of my child does not have the capacity to change, and it may be that we need to be quite radical here and completely change the environment. So I've had situations where my children have moved out for periods of time to supported accommodation for a few weeks, or respite care for up to a few weeks, and that has been able to give us all a breather. And we've been able to work with the people helping us to try and see if we can connect again and actually talk about issues to do with respect and trust and safety, and then engage some more. And that was the only way sometimes to get more supports actually and help in my case. So I think it depends what it is, and if you think you've reached that brick wall, that's where you need to get people on board. Look at some of the material from webinar 2 in particular, where I've identified some programs, and I've talked about Helen Bonnick, who talked about, I think actually I might have that on another slide, sorry, I'll just, because I'm conscious we'll run out of time, but essentially Helen Bonnick's work is talking about how professionals can help actually dig up what and support families more robustly and concretely, but we need them on board to be doing fuller assessments to actually get to the bottom of what has become perhaps an almost impossible problem to solve, but it may not yet be. I mean, I think often people think once they've phoning the police that they cannot, that's the end of the world, but it doesn't have to be. I've certainly been my experience that it's just the beginning of a new chapter sometimes, in a way that will actually bring out into the open stuff that is hidden that we actually cannot solve by ourselves, but we need additional assistance. And sometimes that has meant additional assistance from people who we'd normally go like, police, no, that's not for me, but we have to sometimes do that. I wanted to also, because again, always being conscious of time, because we this is just a slide that is of a recent 40-minute YouTube by Omer, I think it was Omer and Weinblatt, but anyway, a really awesome YouTube account of what nonviolent resistance actually is, because somebody like, again, Gwen and Anthony may be able to incorporate elements of nonviolent resistance. It might not be everything, because it might not work for some children, but it's also about you. What can you do? How do you yourself feel in control or not in control of your family situation? How do you yourself find ways to be loving, but actually also say, hey, I'm really not, I cannot be shoved anymore, I cannot have cups thrown at me anymore, I just cannot do this without throwing them back, because that's not going to work. Any form of escalating is actually just going to make it worse, but we're actually going to be still trying to find ways to say, no, I'm not going to have cups broken around me or any more holes in the walls. But again, it's still all about de-escalation. The focus of the NVR is still about de-escalation, as well as increasing parental presence. It's about acts of reconciliation, where you're still reaching out to your child to show them you love them just for who they are, not for doing anything good, and not because they did something bad. You love them for who they are. You're still trying to find ways to focus on their strengths, which any program that's going to be a good program for our group of lovelies has to focus on their strengths, doesn't it? It has to focus on what they can do. And we all know ourselves how gifted and wonderful they actually are. So I'm just conscious of how we're going with the time. I would also recommend, and NOFASD has done this many times, anything that Eileen Devine often puts up on her website, because she talks about the neurobehavioral style of parenting, which is often about unpacking what's going on for a child and their distress and where they're at, meeting them where they're at in terms of their areas of both strengths and challenges. And then, of course, Yvonne Newbold, we know that she does a series of webinars and Facebook posts around special education needs and disabilities, some of which is relevant and some of which isn't relevant. So I'm going to let Cheryl, if she has any final comments, have the opportunity to do that before we think about closing for today.
Thanks, Anita. I mean, you've just been fabulous and everything is so relevant. So on behalf of all parents, thank you very much. Something I just really want to touch on, a couple of things there that you mentioned about being with your son up on the diving board. That is such an important piece of information because it's about being present and going with your child, being with your child through this journey as much as you possibly can. There are going to be moments where, as Anita has said, you need support, that you can't actually be present with your child because you need to get yourself in that right place, and that's nothing to be ashamed of or anything. So being present with your child. There's another thing that Eileen Devine talks about, which is difficult, time in for your child instead of any sort of time out. Now, I haven't used time out for ever almost, it feels like, because it just does not work. Time in means actually just being with your child after something that has happened. And as Anita said, you just sort of want to get away from that situation. But the truth is that they need you. They actually need you. Often why they're having this behaviour is they need you. So that's something that I would really recommend following up on and looking into. If you look up Eileen Devine then and putting that search, I'm sure that you'll be able to come across that. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll let Sophie unmute and finish us off because thank you so much, everyone. And it's been a beautiful pleasure, and I'm sure we'll connect again in the future. Soph, unmute.
I shared my screen with you all a bit earlier than planned then, apologies. That was amazing, Anita and Cheryl. Thank you so much insight and so many questions answered with, you know, such thorough responses from your lived experiences and your experiences of being able to share with other parents and carers. So thank you for that. I would also like to just share with everyone, we've mentioned the NOFASD helpline a number of times, and the number is on your screen now. The NOFASD helpline is available 7 days a week, but it's not a crisis support line. So I just wanted you to know there are other places also like Beyond Blue, Lifeline and Samaritans that you can also call for any crisis support and intervention that you may require. So those numbers are there for you today. And just would like to end with one final parting moment. My screen's decided it doesn't want to click to the final slide. If we can't get to there, that's okay. What I will share with you is that we have a survey monkey that we will send to you, which we would love you to be able to complete for us when we send those out to you. The survey monkey will just ask for your response to us in terms of how you've found our sessions across the 3 series. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will say goodbye to you now. Thank you very much.